Christopher Columbus is often remembered as the man who discovered America, an event that set in motion profound changes for both Europe and the indigenous peoples of the Americas. While his voyages across the Atlantic were celebrated as daring feats that opened the New World to European exploration, they also marked the beginning of centuries of colonization, exploitation, and tragedy for native populations. This video explores Columbus's journey, the initial encounters with the Taino people, the impact of Spanish colonization, and the legacy left in its wake. Born in 1451 in Genoa, Italy, Christopher Columbus grew up in a bustling maritime city where he developed a deep fascination for the sea and navigation. His early career included seafaring voyages and merchant expeditions that honed his skills in cartography and astronomy. At the end of the 15th century, European nations sought new trade routes to Asia, motivated by the lucrative spice trade. Columbus theorized that a westward sea route across the Atlantic would be faster than navigating around Africa. After multiple rejections from the Portuguese crown, Columbus gained the support of King Ferdinand II and Queen Isabella I of Spain. They agreed to fund his expedition, driven by the promise of expanding Spain's wealth and influence. On August 3, 1492, Columbus set sail from Spain with 3 ships, the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. After 2 arduous months at sea, on the night of October 11, 1492, a sailor named Rodrigo de Triana spotted land. Columbus, however, had earlier claimed to have seen a mysterious light on the horizon, which he interpreted as an omen of land. On October 12, 1492, Columbus and his crew landed in the Bahamas, on an island they named San Salvador. Upon arrival, they encountered the Taino people, who had lived in the Caribbean for over 1,000 years. Columbus described them as generous and welcoming, noting their peaceful demeanor and hospitality. The Taino brought gifts of food, parrots, cotton, and other goods, while the Spaniards reciprocated with beads and red hats. The Taino, who had never seen white men before, initially believed the Spaniards to be gods. Columbus spent the next few weeks exploring nearby islands, including present-day Cuba and Hispaniola, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic. The warm reception by the Taino and the lush land filled with exotic fruits led Columbus to believe he had reached the edges of Asia. His letters back to Spain spoke of a fertile land ready for exploration and conversion to Christianity. Columbus returned to Spain as a hero, bringing with him indigenous captives, gold trinkets, and tales of the New World. Encouraged by this success, the Spanish crown funded a second, much larger voyage. In 1493, Columbus set sail again with 17 ships and over 1,000 men, including settlers, priests, and soldiers. His mission was to establish a Spanish foothold in the Americas. When Columbus reached Hispaniola, he discovered that La Navidad, the fort he had established using the salvaged remains of the Santa Maria, had been destroyed. The 39 men left behind had been killed. It later emerged that the Spanish had mistreated the Taino, stealing and committing acts of violence which led to their demise. The Taino leader, Caonabo, had orchestrated the attack, convinced that the Spaniards were not gods, but mortal men capable of cruelty. Columbus's response was swift and brutal. More fortified settlements were built, including La Isabela, named after Queen Isabella. The Spaniards took revenge, capturing and enslaving the Taino, forcing them into labor in search of gold and other resources. Those who failed to meet the quotas faced severe punishment, including mutilation and death. The Spanish established the encomienda system, which allowed colonists to demand labor and tribute from indigenous people in exchange for supposed protection and conversion to Christianity. In reality, this system amounted to forced labor and harsh exploitation. The Taino, who were not accustomed to such grueling work, suffered immensely. Fields that once sustained entire communities were left untended, leading to widespread hunger among both the Taino and the Spanish settlers. Columbus's insistence on finding gold fueled further abuses. Every adult over 14 years old was required to deliver a specific amount of gold every 3 months or face severe consequences. Those who did not comply had their hands cut off and were left to bleed to death. Such cruelty led to despair and mass deaths among the Taino, with many choosing to commit suicide rather than face continued suffering. Alongside the physical brutality, the Taino were devastated by diseases brought by the Europeans. Smallpox, measles, and influenza spread rapidly through the indigenous population, who had no immunity to these foreign illnesses. Historians estimate that within 50 years of Columbus's arrival, the Taino population had decreased by nearly 90%. The combination of forced labor, violence, and disease led to the near-total collapse of their society. The Taino chief who initially welcomed Columbus, Guacanagari, also suffered a tragic fate. His attempts to maintain peace between his people and the Spaniards failed, and he died, like so many of his fellow Taino, under the harsh rule of the colonizers. Despite the overwhelming power of the Spanish, some Taino leaders resisted. Chief Caonabo, who had led the initial resistance against Columbus's men at La Navidad, was captured and sent to Spain, where he vanished from history. His wife, Anacaona, emerged as a powerful leader, ruling over her people after his capture. In 1503, the Spanish governor Nicolás de Ovando invited Anacaona and 80 other Taino leaders to a gathering under the guise of peace talks. Once they were gathered, Ovando ordered the meeting house to be set on fire, killing everyone inside. Anacaona was captured, accused of conspiracy, and executed by hanging. Her refusal to betray her people by submitting to Spanish demands cemented her legacy as a symbol of resistance and courage. Another significant figure was Enriquillo. Enriquillo is also known by other names such as Henrique or Enrique, a Taino leader who witnessed the massacre that killed his father. In 1519, after a Spanish governor assaulted his wife, Enrique led a successful rebellion. He and his followers established a mountain refuge and resisted Spanish incursions for over a decade through guerrilla warfare. Their knowledge of the terrain gave them an advantage, frustrating the Spanish and leading to a stalemate. Eventually, King Charles V of Spain recognized the futility of continued conflict and signed a treaty granting Enrique and his people freedom and autonomy. Columbus's voyages initiated the Columbian Exchange, an extensive transfer of plants, animals, and culture between the Old and New Worlds. This exchange had profound and lasting impacts. Europe gained valuable crops like potatoes, maize, and tomatoes, which significantly boosted food production and population growth. The introduction of livestock, such as horses and cattle, transformed indigenous agricultural practices and societies. However, the exchange also brought devastating consequences. Diseases spread rapidly, wiping out vast numbers of indigenous populations. Additionally, invasive plant species and animals disrupted local ecosystems. The Columbian Exchange paved the way for the transatlantic slave trade, as European powers sought labor to replace the indigenous populations decimated by disease and overwork. As Columbus's actions came under greater scrutiny, his reputation in Spain began to wane. Reports of his governance, including his harsh treatment of both the Spanish settlers and the indigenous population, reached the Spanish crown. In 1500, Columbus was arrested and returned to Spain in chains. Although he was eventually released, his power and influence were diminished. He embarked on one final voyage in 1502, which proved arduous and unsuccessful. Columbus returned to Spain in 1504, where he spent his last years trying to reclaim his lost titles and wealth. He died in 1506, still believing he had found a westward route to Asia. Over time, Columbus's legacy became more controversial, with historians re-examining his role not just as a daring explorer, but also as a figure who initiated an era of conquest that brought suffering and displacement to countless indigenous people. The impact of Columbus' voyages extended far beyond his death. For Spain, the New World brought immense wealth, bolstering its power and status as a global empire. The flow of gold and silver from the Americas fueled European economies and set the stage for further exploration and colonization by other powers such as Portugal, France, and England. For the indigenous people, however, the consequences were catastrophic. The Taino were one of the first groups to experience the full brunt of European colonization, serving as a harbinger of what would happen to other Native American civilizations in the coming centuries. The loss of life, culture, and autonomy due to violence, disease, and forced assimilation had profound and lasting effects. Christopher Columbus's voyages marked the beginning of a new era, one defined by exploration and connection, but also by exploitation and suffering. While he opened the door to the Americas for Europe, the consequences for the indigenous people were devastating. The legacy of Columbus is a blend of discovery and destruction, ambition and cruelty. To fully understand his impact, we must look beyond the simplified stories of heroism and delve into the complex history that shaped the world we know today.